So yes, without further ado, let's just talk about our little thing this morning about
Yes.
IP and you know, so often we hear people say, "Oh, but it's been my idea. Um, uh, I actually planted this idea, and I actually did this, and everything, and now somebody else is making a big success of what it is that they had the idea about." Um, and that is twofold. Sometimes the idea has been tangible enough to be called IP, and we just didn't protect it securely, or made sure that it's protected, or made sure that people understood our intent to protect it. Or, in as often the case is, it's just been an idea. An idea is not, it's not ours. It doesn't belong to us. Ideas are like, and I will talk about this later in the program too. Ideas are like seed that is sown. It goes out there. It's not unique to us. Um, we will sit with ideas, and sometimes other people have the same ideas. We often get together in groups, and then we realize we are talking about the same things, using the same language, maybe not the exact same words, but the ideas are generally the same, um, and or generically, and let me put it that way. The and so it's not unique to a person. An idea is there to inspire you to action, to put action to thoughts, and get things going. But if you don't do that, then somebody else is going to do that, because there's probably 100,000 other people that has the same idea. So somewhere along the line, those lines get crossed. When you start to put action to that idea, that is when things become real. And there's certain things that we need to realize when we want to take ownership of an idea, and call it IP, because that is the word that is generally used for it, or the term, then it needs to meet certain criteria. And if we want to make sure that our ideas are so protected, then at least develop the idea to the extent where it meets the criteria, so that we can call it IP, and then we can protect it. And then we can blame people for taking our ideas and running with it without our permission. But generally, ideas and even vision to a certain extent is still very much the seed that we work with. We either sow it or we plant it. And in lots of instances, like the scripture that I like to quote in Habakkuk 2, where we are instructed to write our vision on the tablets, the thoughts, the ideas that we have, and let those who see with it. So we need to make it known. We need to sow it out there, because then it has a return for us. There will be a harvest from the ideas that we've sown. Now, to, to, to understand that part of it is also, when it comes to spiritual harvests, we don't always reap where we have sown. The word teaches us very clearly that sometimes we will reap where somebody else has sown. Or somebody else will reap where we have sown. So it's not an ownership thing. It is the fact that if you sow, you will reap. It's not saying where you will reap, but you will reap. And I think we need to see the ideas that we are sowing into the lives of other people as seed that we are giving them, a life-giving seed for that matter. It's not what we label it as, it will be. So we can either take offense if we see they run with it and label those seeds as stolen, and then with that, whatever goes with the judgment that we've issued in terms of then labeling them as thieves and the stolen seed, which is not a good thing to be. Never take offense, because we cannot afford to take offense. Let it go. Let those seeds go. Let them multiply. Let them become life in the lives of other people. Okay, that's another sermon for another day. So let's just talk about Hey, come on. Intellectual property. I just want to share my screen quickly. Okay, there you go. Intellectual property. I think it's important that we clearly define this for ourselves, because I often get the question about what intellectual property is all about. How do I know that what I have is actually of value? How do I quantify it when it comes to negotiations and stuff in business? How do I protect it and all those things? Now, I think it's very difficult to answer the questions, especially the question on value, because we never know where these things are going to. We never know who may stumble on it and then uh, take it and run with it and make a lot of money. What we do have to know is that it has value, and we need to protect that in a way that when that value is realized, maybe not by ourselves but by somebody else, then we will have some benefit from that. That is what intellectual properties and all the laws and the regulations and stuff, mostly morally, is about. The definition of intellectual property. Intellectual property is a category of property that includes intangible creations of the human intellect. IP generally includes inventions, literary and artistic works, designs, symbols, names, and images used in commerce or for commercial benefit. Now that is the general criteria, or not criteria, definition, and what is usually covered in that. But we need to look at the different categories of that is also generally accepted. These four categories is worldwide. That's the standard. We need to understand if we have an idea, or if we have a concept that meets the criteria of intellectual property, where does it fit into these things? Some of these can be registered or should be registered, like patents. Trademarks can be registered, it need not be registered. Copyright, the same thing, you can register it or you need not register it. And the same thing with trademarks. I mean, trade secrets. Trade secrets is not in the form of as a secret. It's not really registrable. So it's difficult to protect it unless you give it some form and you attach copyright to it or a trademark, or you even go as far as actually patenting your trade secret. But patenting stuff gives you temporary protection. It's not always the way to go. It's expensive for that matter. And the thing is, with the trade secret, it also has just a window of relevance. So it will be relevant for a short period, and then as technology and knowledge and all these things increase and improve, our secrets no longer really that much of a secret or a relevance. Now, trade secrets refer to specific confidential information that is important to a business because it gives the business a competitive advantage in its marketplace. These include methodologies, processes, strategies, concepts, and stuff that are both new and unique. And those are little things, the nuances that we need to understand. Trade secrets are protected without official registration, provided that its owners actively demonstrates their desire to protect the information and retain attached rights. Now that is important, because this is where we fail. We have this thing that we know is a solution to some need out there, and we know that we want to take it out. And if you start a business, that is exactly what you do. You see a need, and you know you have a solution, so you are going to fulfill that need with a solution that you have and turn it into a business. So when you do your planning of your business and you actually develop your business strategies and plans and stuff, that's the first thing you do is identify the need, identify the solution that you have, and bring the two together. How are you going to fulfill in this need with this solution? Now, what we often don't do is say, okay, this solution that I have has got lots of value, and I'm going to bring other people into this business to help me make this business work. How am I going to protect that solution? And that is where we need to draw the lines. We need to have basic agreements in place. It need not be complex stuff, but it needs to be reduced to in writing, because you are going to refer back to it at some point in future. Last week we spoke about the roles and responsibilities, clearly defining it, and it comes back to the same thing. Who's going to put what into the business? Who's going to do what functions and whatever tasks? What will their responsibilities be? And what can we expect from one another? Those are all the lines that we need to draw. And exactly the same thing with IP too. If you put intellectual property into a business, then you need to know at least what the value of that property is that you're putting into it. And you need to have some form of an agreement, whether it's just a simple memorandum of understanding that you sign or you have signed with everybody else involved there, that they have free access to use your IP, but these are the rules. My IP can be used, but you need to follow the rules. And at the end of the day, there needs to be some reward for you in making your IP available. So you need to state that too, exactly what your expectation is in terms of reward. Now, as I said, determining the value of IP is not easy. It's a difficult process. Sometimes it's ambiguous, so you don't really know how to determine that value. But you need to have some kind of an idea and be realistic about it. Some people would put IP into a business because they know that it's going to make the business work, but then they are so unreasonable in their value expectation of their IP that they actually kill the business. And you can't do that. We cannot drain a business, because your IP also needs a platform within which it will work. Otherwise, it's got no value. So it's no use putting an unreasonable value on your IP if the business that you want to put it into is actually going to realize the value. So that I would advise you to maybe get professional assistance, people that you can consult with to help you guide through the process to establishing the value and establishing the rules and all the stuff around that for people to actually use your IP. Now, in some cases it's difficult, other cases it's simple. If it's a simple design that you do for somebody, an artistic thing that's on paper, it's there, then you can put a value to it and they pay you for that. But then you need to know that value, that what you're giving, you're either selling it to them outright with all the rights, or you are selling them the use of that, but you also have the right to use the same design in other situations where you can have benefit from. So depending on how you do that, selling it outright will probably give you a better cash value at the time that you actually sell it. If you just sell the rights, then the immediate cash value is less, but the future value may be more than what you have in terms of the cash value right now. So you can realize more value from the same design going forward. But some designs won't allow you to do that. If you're in the business of creating logos and brands and that stuff, then obviously it is for an outright sale. You cannot create the brand for a business and then expect to have benefit from that same brand from somebody else. It just won't work. There's a conflict of interest. So there's certain things you need to understand exactly what it is that your design or your IP is going to do for your client, so that you can actually know whether it should be an outright sale or whether it should be something that you can benefit from ongoing as well. Now there's lots of things that we can do. There's processes and there's software technology. My sons are in the software developing business, and they have software that they've designed specifically for specific clients, from which they have with which they have a license agreement. So as the clients use their IP, it remains the clients, as they can't sell it to anybody else. So there's a trade restriction of trade agreement. But as the client uses the IP, the software, because they will have to improve it and keep making sure that it remains relevant and functional, they pay license fees annually for the use of that. So that's another way of making your IP work for yourself. Enter into some sort of a use agreement, whether it's a licensing agreement, annual fee, what that they pay for the use of it, whatever, it doesn't matter. But we need to protect it in some way or another. Now there's probably a lot of qualifying criteria that we can attach to IP, but I think the four main ones is simply this: it must be realizable. An idea is only got value when you can actually turn that idea in value for somebody somewhere. So it must be realizable. It must be new. You cannot build things that has become public domain. Now, public domain, we had an incident a couple of years ago, and this will always be with me. The guys that manufactured, they were big in South Africa. Can't remember their name now, but they manufactured wheelbarrows. So in some way or another, one of their directors decided that he's going to try and patent wheelbarrows. And because there was nowhere in the world did there exist any form of patent or protection in terms of the design of a wheelbarrow. And they spent a lot of money on that. And but at the end of the day, they could not register the patent because it was termed public domain. So it must be new. It must not. You cannot go and claim something that somebody else did many years ago, and because now all of a sudden there's a new application for it, now you turn it into a patent or something. So you need to be careful how you work with stuff that comes from way back, and it must have benefit to somebody. If it hasn't got benefit, then it's got no commercial value. And IP must have some form of commercial value, and it must be identifiable. And this is often where we have these ideas, but we haven't given the idea any shape or any identity that we can actually say, okay, this is my solution. So we need to work whatever idea it is to the point where we actually have a solid, identifiable solution that is both new in its application or innovative in its application. Now, innovation is also a difficult thing because innovation is not protected by your patent laws or trademarks or copyrights or anything like that. It needs to be something that it's already in a tangible form. Now that's the criteria. Now, this is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, at the root of many a conflict in business, we will find somebody saying that has actually been my idea, and you are making money of it. On the other side of the coin, as we said last week, we have people saying, but I'm doing all the work and you're not doing all the work. So the roles and responsibilities is not clearly defined. Yeah, we sit with a scenario where potential IP has come on the table and utilized in the business without it being given somebody or some identification, without it meeting all the criteria, and now we claim it to be our intellectual property, and big fights come from that. Guys, we cannot use an idea. If an idea, as I said in the beginning, is like seed sown in the wind. It goes everywhere. It belongs to no one. It belongs to everyone. Before any idea has as protectable rights, it must become applicable. So we need to find some way to actually bring our idea to the point where it's now you can go and apply it anywhere else, or in different scenarios, or scenarios specifically designed the need that you've created that solution for. This is not to suggest that ideas are not valuable. Ideas are valuable. As we also said, I think in one of our previous discussions, that your imagination is the breeding ground for whatever is going to happen in your life onwards. So the ideas that you have is potentially your next breakthrough. The idea that you have is potentially your success in life. But you need to assume the responsibility. Don't think because you have the idea that other people are going to respect your ideas. If you don't protect it, they won't. If you protect it and you draw the lines clearly, then obviously you have a legal right to go back to them and say, guys, this has been my idea. And you know that because we've had this discussion. There's in writing the agenda of the meeting, or whatever it was that we had in the discussion, communication, correspondence that went out, and there you signed a memorandum of agreement stating that you will actually treat it with confidentiality. So there's ways in which we need to go about before we can claim rights to any ideas. Okay. How do I protect my IP? Make it identifiable, first of all. So you need to give it a good identity, some form in which you can refer to. Make your wish to protect it known. Everybody must know that this is yours, and you are sharing it with them, but it is protected. Set the rules. Make sure that the rules of the use of your IP is clear, that people know if they use this IP for their benefit, then this is their responsibility. They are going to be held accountable. There is payment, or there may not be payment. Sometimes you make IP available to people free of charge, but they need to still comply with certain rules. It's like the open source software that we have. It's a known thing. It's IP of somebody somewhere, which is put out on the internet, and you can use it free of charge. But there's certain things that you need to comply with. They often use it as a marketing tool. So there might be a thing that you need to fill in to tell them exactly why you use it, what it is. There's different things attached to that. Some just put it out there to test the stuff, to see how it works. So you have a responsibility to give them feedback on it, whatever the situation. So there must be rules attached to the use of your IP. Draft some form of an agreement. It need not be a complicated thing. A simple MOU, you can do it by hand if you have to, but it needs to have certain key elements in it. A description of the parties involved, you as the provider of the IP, the other party as the user of the IP, what the IP is, so identify the IP clearly, and the rules of the use, and the reward, if there's any reward for the use of the IP. Manage your IP accordingly. So you need to manage that contract. Don't let them just sign it and off they go and they do what they want to. If your IP is important enough, it might not be. I mean, IP comes in different forms, but there's certain things. So there's been IP out there in the world that is very important. It's life-changing stuff. It's your responsibility to go and see that to make sure that it's monitored and that other people comply with the rules that you've set there. Otherwise, the vision that you've had for that IP or for the use thereof may just disappear totally. Keep it relevant. Make sure that it's functional, up to date, relevant at the time, and register your rights if it's registrable. Patents, copyrights, trademarks, it's always good to have the law on your side in that. Mitigate all conflict, know and protect your rights. This is important. It's if you want to be in business, these are the simple things that you need to know. So that is stop share. I see we still have about 5 minutes, just over 5 minutes left. um, to talk, and then we can go into a second session if you want to. George, you wanna talk to us there? Share some wisdom with us.
I would like to just mention, Steve, that we're talking secular world in a lot of instances here, and there's a saying, the law is an ass. Now, I believe that I've been there. It cost me a fortune, in fact, over R500,000 to send an advocate and a lawyer across to the UK to try and fight a case of software IP that my company bought. We had to get Reserve Bank approval to send huge amounts of pounds across to buy the rights for Africa for my Optimus, which is a Latin word for the best, by the way. So Optimus Computer Systems Pty Limited was my company, which owned the software called Optimus, which was a management information system before SAP came into the country. And then there's the other side of that's the secular world IP, I believe. But then there's the other one, which I'm struggling with at the moment, is the vision of the God-given IP that is said, this is what we want you to do, this is what your instructions are, and you must carry those forward. And a lot of people then bring in the secular world IP regulations into that environment and see it as a business opportunity, which I'm against. I think if it's a God-given gift, then it should go, all the glory and the rewards go to God's work. So, and you know what I'm referring to quite, because I brought you into it, and I didn't mean to bring Huge into it. I wanted to bring you into it. But cut a long story short, I made a couple of notes here. I had a problem with IP where it was stolen from me by the company that I actually bought the product from, which was a British company. And it was during the years of sanctions against South Africa, where Britain couldn't deal with South Africa. And as I said to you, they then came in after sanctions were lifted and said, right, thank you for building this fantastic business, which was a 300 million rand a year business out of software. And thank you for that. And we'll just take it all back. And that's what cost me a lot of money to try and fight that. But I was going to say to you, you mentioned the word applicable. It must become applicable. I think there's also another aspect that comes in, that it's usage. I had someone try to, from overseas, Australian company, try to steal my IP, which was my brand called Ambus, which stood in those days for a management business intelligence services group. And I built my company around that. And they went and registered the name and everything else because I hadn't registered it. But I got it back because of usage. There's a thing that and I think the bottom line is we must all realize ideas are not patentable. You can't patent an idea. Ideas are dime a dozen, I tell people. But what you can do by is taking that idea and creating it into a product, and then by usage of that product, it becomes yours. You don't actually have to have a patent number for that. It's like I was registering the company, I was using the name, I was using it for years. And then this company overseas suddenly grabbed my my name and my email address, and I had to fight to get that back. So I think we must be very clear on the religious vision side of it and the secular side of IP. But I believe there's a crossover of the above, and that really is my 2 cents worth. Myself, Steve, I think while we're waiting, I was just going to say to you that I think it is important to distinguish between, the legal IP structure and a message or an idea which one is trying to perpetuate across the planet. And I have no problem in perpetuating that the world's waste will feed the poor, because I honestly believe that was not my idea, and I've written it about it. It just came to me in a call it a dream, a vision, and I wrote it down. In those days, as a businessman, I used to actually write my ideas down that I had, in my subconscious, which we know never sleeps, used to give you that idea. And what it's made me think about, though, is the types of people, because I've got a, you get the opportunist, you get the person who's the giver, you get the person who's the taker. And I wrote it down. In fact, it's going to be part of this morning. The doers, the talkers, the takers, the authentic, the fraudulous, the generous, the helpers, the hangers-on, the opportunists. One has to bring that into, where someone sees an opportunity. And I think with the internet, there's a huge amount of plagiarism taking place.
Yeah.
People just copy and paste and think it's their idea.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, George, is very relevant, because and that's one of the reasons why I always say, guys, we shouldn't take ownership of stuff. We should become good stewards of stuff. Because if we take ownership, we assume responsibilities that is probably not ours, even if it rightfully belongs to us. It's not about being the owner of things. It is about allowing things to work for the benefit of as many as possible. And this is why we as Christians will sit, always be caught between this fires, the two fires, the one of how the world wants to do it, and the other one, how you feel in your heart it should be done. You were saying that there's things that is important to you, which you would like to see go out to this world freely, but then the world sees a business opportunity in it, and they turn it into a business, which I think is sad, but it's inevitable. It's stuff that will happen, because that's just the way in which the world is. That is how humans have developed this thing that we call the human condition. It's part of who we've become, and it's sad to actually say that, to say, we're no longer the giving people that we are supposed to be. But that being said, it's not necessarily wrong if the world sees an opportunity in what you have sown out there, and they turn it into a business. At least there's some benefit of it. But we need to make sure that if we make these things available, that we do it under certain conditions, that we attach, I don't want to say rules to it, but that we attach conditions to it, to say, guys, you can use this, it's free of charge. You can use it even to make money if you want to, but there's moral, these are the core values that we would like to ascribe to whatever it is that you do. If they then decide to go against that core values, they immediately place them in judgment, because whatever you have comes from God, and the judgment is not ours. So all we can put it out there and let them make the decision as to how they're going to work with it. How are they going to apply it to their own life, or benefit from it? If that benefit that they get from it is unjustly, then they will be judged accordingly. But that judgment is not ours. I don't even look at it. I've had so many situations in my life, and at I don't want to say late stage in my life, but at the age of about 40, around about there, I realized that you know what, it's not for me to try and fight this fight. I've also been in court about many things in my life that I've lost in the past, and I decided to walk away from it, just after the scenario with the Inyati thing, where we lost millions. And the way in which God has come through for us, and this is the advantage that we have. We never lose. There's never a loss that we cannot overcome. The loss may be temporary, and it may be in monetary value, it may be in material stuff, but it's never a loss. Um, if people steal from you, that's not a loss because God is there. He's the judge. He's our insurance or assurance, and He will make sure that we will always be okay. And I experienced that in my life. I walked away from stuff. Even my dad came to me at one stage and he said to me, Steve, sue them. You've got all the right to do that. And I said, I have, but I choose not to because God is my vindication. He's the one that will make sure that I'm okay. And I came out on the other side, not with millions in the bank, but being taken care of. Um, I've in many situations when it comes to this, we need to realize that God is our provider. He's our protector. He's our vindication. And there's nothing nobody can do to us um, that that will not. It has to go through him. He has to give it some ordination to actually let it happen in your life. Otherwise, it won't happen. And if it happens, then he will make sure that you're okay because he promises us in his word that all things will work together for the good of those who love him. Sorry, that's another sermon for another day. Anyone else wants to share with us? Okay, everybody.
Yeah, Steve, that
Yeah,
was very good. Well, actually, just even the testimony of me coming back to South Africa is all my stuff that I had in storage in America. They came in and they auctioned every bit of it out for $23.
sure.
And I remember how devastated I was. But what you're saying now is that, and I think it's something that Lerato said about when your faith is tested, it becomes an enduring faith. And so I think that comes back to, do we trust God with what He has for us? Just like you said, that we cannot lose it. And the thing that I think you really struck a chord with me is the value that you carry is what you don't want to lose. So that's why I started talking to you about this yesterday, is because I've developed an alphabet, a French speaking alphabet, and I've got the connections to get it out there. But the people who start getting involved in the process, what rights do they have? And what right do you have to say, hang on, pull it back, this is still mine, this is my vision, this is what I started with, when people are running alongside you and they want to pull it back and forth, you know?
Hmm. Uh, you you are typically sitting in a situation where you have a choice to make, and that choice is between being an owner or being a good steward.
Mm-hmm.
You can take ownership. Nobody will blame you. Nobody will point any fingers at you. Not even God will do that. He will respect your decision. But if you take ownership, then you need to know that all the responsibility of whatever it is that you've been given in this design becomes yours then. If you say to God, I just want to be a good steward of what you've given me. Let this thing go out as it should. Let your will be done, if you may. And just let it go. Let this thing grow organically. This thing may become so big that you become a small part of a big thing instead of being a big part of a small thing. I think
Mm-hmm.
we need to also always, before
That's good.
we become emotionally attached to the stuff that we've been blessed with, we should always think of the consequences, the stuff, the impact that it can have. Go and sit down and measure what you see that impact to be at the end of the day and create different scenarios. Create a scenario where you run with it on your own. uh, I've shared the impact mapping thing with you in your group. Look at that, see how this idea will develop if you run with it on your own. And then a scenario where you have certain people involved, create the scenario there. and then a scenario where you make it an open source thing and you allow this thing to go into the wide world out there with certain conditions and stuff attached to it, and what impact it will have then. Because it may be about the message, not necessarily about the design or the physical thing that you're working with. So those are the scenarios that one has to work through when you work, especially when you work with IP, because IP in many instances is God-given. Whether you're out there in the world, you can be the crookedest, baddest ass out there, and God will still use you. And I think we need to realize that whatever the world is sitting with, whatever creative stuff that they come up with, is God given, because of His grace, not because. And He loves the entire world to the extent that He's given Him His Son, given them His Son. So how much more will He just give us all these little things, regardless of who you are?
I think, because I have a teaching background and I have a passion to make reading easy, I get a little bit frustrated when it seems like a motive is money driven when mine is I want to get children to read. And I think that's where it's difficult to understand the letting
But you
go.
see, there you can draw the line. There you can set the conditions and say, okay, guys, this is for free, or for what it is that you want to, if you want to do it as an open source thing. And the condition would be that everybody shares it as widely as possible. They can use it, but they also need to share it. And I think that is often where we actually should be, instead of saying this. I think we need to also bring 2 Corinthians 9 into this thing about giving and receiving and all those things, where God gives to the sower seed for sowing, seed for bread, seed for everything. So we need to realize that some seed we get to sow, some seed we have so that we can make bread of it. So we need to, it's for sustenance. And that's how God provides for us. If we understand that, then we'll know that some of the things, the ideas that we get, is actually for ourselves. It's to benefit from it so that we can actually live off it. And then there's many ways in which you can actually put that into practice. And then some seed is just there for sowing. Whatever happens to it, you will have a harvest regardless of where it may be. There's challenging.
I think I also feel frustrated like Lisa does, because the world's waste will feed the poor. As I said, it's the title that people didn't like, which I'm not changing it, because those 7 words came down to me as an IP man, IT man, WWW, and they had such significant meanings to me. But the words that were stuck in there, I know weren't mine. Why would I have thought about the world's waste will feed the poor? You know what I'm getting at? So it's bigger than just the wording, and that's what people didn't like. People like Viv, people like Herman. I wasn't going to change that name for anything, because to me that's the name that was given to me, and I must carry that through. But it's the bigger picture, and I always say, if you look at the vision, it's about creating skills. If a man has a skill, you can give him a job. If he's got a job, you can give him a business and help him to mentor and help him to found that business into a sustainable, profitable work. So the business side of it comes into this. It's not about, but I don't want to have it with people who are trying to direct it in their way because it's for their own, agendas or whatever you'd like to call it. I want them to work with me so that we can look at the vision which comes from above and make sure that it is implemented. Alexandra Township is basically just one beta test site. This could be rolled out throughout Africa, never mind South Africa. And, I am giving that message out there because I believe that's now my function as an old man. I can't get into the river and go and clean it up anymore. I used to do that here at the Yevsky River. We used to go down under the bridge, and every so often with the Kyalami people, American lady, by the way, who ran, I forget what her little Section 2018 company is called, but we used to go and join her as Lone Hillers and clean up the river that runs next to Lone Hill. But you know, it's quite hard work. It's in the sun. It's dirty work because you've got to get into that filth. You can pick up diseases there, you know, from the dirty water and the dirty stuff that people have thrown into the rivers. So I want youth, young people, to be able to work with me, but see the vision, if you know what I'm getting at. And I think that's what Lisa's getting at. Her vision is to see that the children are educated, that are happy, or, you know, taught in certain things. And I want to do the same with with the people that I'm dealing with. I've got a young black gentleman in Alexandra. Unfortunately, he grabs at straws because he's looking for people who will help him. And whoever comes along with a suggestion, he grabs that person. I'm trying to focus him on, you know, and he brings in other people all the time, which just complicates the whole picture all the time. You know what I mean? Yeah. Anyway, that I don't want to, you know, take over the meeting, but I understand where people are coming from. And I'd like to, you know, down the track, when we've settled this thing down, that's why I said to you, let me just sort it out with, you know, with one of the members of Huge, and then we will bring Huge into it, because I see everybody in Huge has got a part to play. I mean, I see Lisa selling her books to the children. I see her dancing with the kids, and in, you know, and you must remember, Alexandra is a huge township. There's over 1 million people living there. You know, yeah. I've got pictures of them being washed away in a flood, those houses. There's women that built her house right on the river again. I'll bet you with this flooding, they've been taken out. Oh, they don't understand the 50-year flood line and the 100-year flood line, you know. This is basic knowledge that has to be taught to people. Yeah. You don't build your house on the river, because the river in 50 years could, you know, be 10 times as wide.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, guys, I think that sort of wraps it up for today. I think it's been good, challenging.
Thanks. Thanks again, Steve, for your, you know, your wisdom and bringing it and focusing it. I think it's important that we all know these things. And as I said, I can give you a whole ream of a book, you know, a whole book on my IP experiences with my software. And your son needs to be very careful. I've actually warned even Lisa. I said, Lisa, make sure people sign a non-disclosure. Yeah. And I actually include a non-circumvention clause in my non-disclosure. So they can't go around you. Because I don't know if you know it, you can change a patent by 15% and it becomes yours. Yeah. Do you know that? A patent. Now, the law is an act. Yeah. The law doesn't protect you.
Oh, I do have one last question, like on an NDA. We're looking at an NDA from an American film company, and it actually has a clause that says that they can, if you bring your idea to them and they already had a similar idea, they can still run with theirs and you've got no claim on it. So how can you definitely make sure that they didn't get their idea from what you brought to the table? You can't, right?
Exactly.
That is typically.
I would ask them to show you. Yeah, before you give them your idea, you ask them, well, then, if you're so confident, show me that idea, then I bet you they won't.
I think in that same clause,
there's lots of scam artists out there.
Mm-hmm.
You see, that's typically the games that they will play with you, is to do that. But that's a one-sided agreement, and by law, if you do an agreement like that, then it's not valid. The agreements need to meet certain criteria too. So you cannot draft an agreement and have a clause in there that will benefit you alone, especially if it is as ambiguous as the one that you have. When they sign the agreement with you, they should know whether they have a similar idea or not. So they should clearly state there that they don't have one. So I think one needs to be firm on that, because these guys are very unscrupulous when it comes to these things.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would
Thank you,
thank other
Steve. That
people like that.
really answered my question.
Yeah.
Anyway,
just-
thanks, Steve. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, Hans.
Have a
Lekker
good
dag
day.
vir julle. Love you all.
Same to
Vir
you.
jou
Bye.
ook.
Steve,
Bye.
lekker
Bye.
dag. Bye, Lisa.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye, Sinead.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye,
Joe.
Sinead.
Mhm.